welcome to another stirring episode of Sex in the Watchtower, where we explore the strange and unlikely teachings of the Jehovah's Witnesses about sex. If you just stumbled upon this video with no context, you might be wondering, what the hell is going on here? Jehovah's Witnesses are fundamentalists, after all, even though they don't call themselves that, so there shouldn't be a whole lot to say about their views on sex. Should there? Au contraire, ma frere. These people are perfectly square on the surface, but they are super freaks underneath, and not in a good way. I feel the need to point out that this is the 19th video in this series, and we still haven't reached the current year, that being 2020, and we haven't delved any further back than 1970. But the Jehovah's Witnesses have actually existed since about 1874, and they've been pontificating about the subject of sex for almost that long. In case you need a reminder, this video series is really not safe for work. You don't want your kids watching it either. It's okay, I am keeping my clothes on, but despite the fact that witness kids are exposed to this very crap almost constantly, it's really not appropriate. Side note, it has been rather hard to put these videos together since the COVID-19 quarantine started back in March, because my kids are here in the house with me at all times, thus the reason I'm outside, and I don't really want them exposed to the kind of unhealthy brainwashing on this subject that I was raised on. It just seems like it might be problematic. Anyway, you may want to wear your headphones for this, y'all. Let's get started. Our first piece of work for today's episode is found in a book called Insight on the Scriptures, Volume 2.
The respect that Jehovah has for man's right to have children by his wife and for the reproductive powers he has placed in man and woman was emphasized by the law. Brother-in-law marriage provided for the continuance of a man's family line, name, and inheritance.
What the hell kind of screwed up misogynist redneck mess is this? I guess I shouldn't be too surprised, since in Bible times women were basically just property. Not quite slaves, but close enough. But basically the law said that if a man died and he was married but had no children, then his brother was supposed to marry his wife and have children with her. I'm thinking about my brothers-in-law right now. Wow. I mean, I love y'all and all, but I would love to see a motherfucker try, is all I'm saying. Good thing we've already procreated sufficiently. Anyway, can you imagine losing your husband and then having no choice but to immediately marry his brother? No thanks.
Immediately following the statement of this arrangement, the law went on to say that if two men were struggling together and the wife of one of them grabbed the other man by his private parts in order to assist her husband, an act that could destroy the reproductive powers of the man, her hand was to be amputated.
Once again, I must ask, what the fuck? Was it a regular occurrence for men to just struggle and wrestle together back then? I mean, was it so common for a woman to just reach over and grab a dude's nuts and twist that they had to threaten decapitation? Seems kind of extreme. And how was it so easy for her to just grab his private parts? I mean, wasn't he wearing clothes? I could be wrong, but it seems like something else might have been going on here. Just maybe. Also, just because it is possible that she could render him unable to procreate this way, does it make sense for her to lose a hand? Shouldn't they at least make sure the dude's actually damaged, or that he wasn't already shooting blanks before just lopping off the lady's hands?
So the law of like for like did not here apply. God did not require the destruction of her reproductive organs or those of her husband. In this way, the marriage could still be fruitful, her husband's family line being carried on through it.
Well, it would seem to me that it would be a lot harder for a bunch of goat-herding primitives to sterilize a woman without killing her. And they obviously cared too much about penises and testicles to go lopping those off of her husband, I guess. So don't worry, fine, upstanding witnesses, she can still be a baby factory without hands. Changing diapers and making dinner might get a little dicey, but dicks are important, right guys?
In the case of the Christian congregation, persons who have been castrated are not barred from entry, for the law has been set aside on the basis of Christ's sacrifice.
Wait, what? Why would they even think about banning people who've been castrated from the Kingdom Hall? For one thing, how would they even know that? Is that something a dude would be expected to confess, right off the bat?
Nevertheless, the laws above quoted illustrate God's regard for the reproductive organs and strongly indicate that an operation that would destroy a person's procreative powers simply because he had no appreciation for that gift from God would be wrong.
Oh, at last we get to the point. Jehovah's Witnesses shouldn't get vasectomies or oophorectomies or tubal ligations. First of all, they could have said that without all this mumbo jumbo about marrying brothers-in-law or chopping off body parts. And second, they shouldn't even get to have an opinion on this. To be perfectly honest, a person could have literally a million reasons for wanting to ensure that they don't procreate. They could be carriers for some terrible genetic disease. They could be totally aware that they would be lousy parents. They could have a condition that would make pregnancy dangerous for the mother. Or they could just not want children. That is none of the Jehovah's Witnesses' business. Butt out, brothers. Our next article is from the Watchtower in 2017. It's called
Cultivate SelfControl.
So they're discussing Jacob's son Joseph here.
He showed restraint when he was serving in the house of Potiphar, the chief of Pharaoh's guards. Potiphar's wife set her eyes on Joseph, who was well-built and handsome. And she tried to seduce him.
The dirty slut.
What prevented Joseph from succumbing to her repeated advances?
I don't know. Maybe he wasn't attracted to her. Maybe he was gay. Maybe he knew that if old Potty found out, he'd get his head chopped off. Maybe he thought getting it on with another man's wife was gross, which it is.
No doubt he took the time to consider what the consequences would be if he were to lower his guard. And when the situation became critical, he fled from her.
Run away! You know, a simple no would have been sufficient. I mean, how critical are we talking here? This makes it sound like she was going to barbecue him and eat him for dinner. So this article was a Watchtower study article, meaning that the entire congregation had to listen to somebody read each paragraph aloud, which was a real joy, let me tell you, especially depending on who was reader that day. And then the study conductor would read a question aloud and people in the congregation would raise their hand to supply the expected answer. Now you cannot imagine the consternation when somebody's Bible study or the occasional worldly person came to the Kingdom Hall, raised their hand, got called on, and gave an overly thoughtful answer or even asked a question.
Oh, Jehovah!
People would actually snicker if someone asked a question. Anyway, here is the question for the next paragraph. Let's see if we can answer it.
How can you prepare yourself to resist temptation?
Oh. How often do you find yourself faced with temptation? I can't think of many times, honestly. I might be tempted to eat too many cookies if they're just sitting there, being delicious. Or I might be tempted to axe kick someone if they're particularly annoying. I usually don't do those things, though, usually. But what do you think the Jehovah's Witness response to this would be? Imagining every scenario that might test you and how you might respond like a true theocratic warrior. I feel like Jehovah's Witnesses are expected to do a lot of that, which in the context of sexual situations seems like it might be counterproductive for them.
What does Joseph's example teach us?
Joseph's example teaches us that we should not use our words like adults, but instead we should physically run away when we think someone might find us attractive.
One thing is that we may need to flee from the temptation to break one of God's laws. In the past, some who are now witnesses struggled with overeating, heavy drinking, smoking, drug abuse, sexual immorality, and the like.
Oh yeah, the struggle is real.
Even after baptism, they may at times be tempted to return to their former practices. My!
Honestly, I knew a lot of witnesses who struggled with overeating and heavy drinking. Those were almost the only pastimes they really had. Everything else was so laden with guilt and shame that there wasn't much else available to do besides read the Watchtower. And y'all, baptism isn't some kind of magic ceremony that suddenly changes your psychological makeup. If you are a chronic weed smoker or a chronic masturbator, getting dunked in a pool in the middle of an assembly hall or a coliseum isn't really going to change that.
Still, if you are ever tempted to break one of Jehovah's laws...
But there are so many, and they're not all written down. Surely we can't be expected to memorize all of the laws. It might be easier for a witness to remember the short list of things that they are allowed to do. Study the Watchtower, go in service, attend the occasional congregational gathering if there are elders there, clean the house, mow the grass, occasionally have approved restrained missionary position sex if you're married, but don't enjoy it too much.
Strengthen yourself by taking time to ponder the disastrous spiritual consequences that you could face for failing to restrain sinful impulses. You can try to foresee situations in which temptations could likely present themselves and decide how you can avoid them. Should you ever face such a test, ask Jehovah to give you the wisdom and self-control to resist.
So yeah, they are supposed to imagine tempting situations. Most likely sexual in nature, I would think, because let's be honest, no one is freaking out this hard about getting drunk or eating something. But they're supposed to think about the disastrous consequences of whatever the thing is that they want to do. Most likely shunning and ostracism by literally every friend or family member you have, including your own parents, siblings, spouse, and children. Well, that kills the mood.
Many young Christians face a trial like Joseph's.
Really? Can anyone tell me how many young Christians are slaves in this day and age? And how many of them are sexually harassed by the wife of their slave owner? Ew! Come on, Watchtower. Even you can do better than this.
Consider Kim.
Kim who?
Most of her classmates were sexually active, and after a typical weekend, they boasted of their latest sexual encounters.
Well, they sound like assholes.
Kim had no such stories to tell. She admits that being different at times made her feel abandoned and alone, and that her peers considered her stupid because she did not date.
Alone I can understand, but abandoned? By who? Kim's schoolmates don't owe her anything. I mean, they shouldn't bully her, but they don't have any responsibility for her feelings. They're just telling their friends about their own dubious exploits, which may or may not have actually happened, y'all. The article doesn't say that they made fun of her or even that they said anything to her at all. Yet Kim's all up in her feelings about it. I wonder why. I mean, did they actually say she was stupid, or did she just feel that way? It's really hard to tell here.
Yet Kim was wise enough to know that among many youths the temptation to engage in sex is great. Schoolmates often asked whether she was still a virgin.
Well, I mean, it could be a legitimate question. They might wonder if she's just sitting there listening wide-eyed to their stories like, but honestly, this could go either way. They could be picking on her a little bit. Why? Why would they do such a thing? Well,
that gave her the opportunity to explain why she would not engage in sex.
And there you have it. She's setting herself up here. You want to be left out of a group of teenagers real quick? Start preaching to them. Extra points if you use really culty-coded language when doing so.
I will not engage in sex or necking or heavy petting, and I will not share in sexual immorality because I am one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I must remain clean and chaste until marriage, preferably to a ministerial servant or an elder. Would you like a free copy of the Watchtower and Awake magazines? Perhaps we could have a free home Bible study, and you could learn to be repressed and sexually frustrated too.
We are proud of young Christians who are determined to resist pressure to share in sexual immorality, and Jehovah is proud of them too.
Well, I guess it's nice of him to let us know how Jehovah feels, I guess. I mean, I'm sure he would do it himself if he were, I don't know, almighty or real or anything. Our next article is from the Watchtower in 2019, and it's called,
"Look Out That No One Takes You Captive."
Wow, are there that many kidnappers running around? I mean, does there need to be a public service announcement or an APB or something? I didn't hear anything on the news.
Satan appeals to immoral desires. In the days of ancient Israel, Satan used false religion to promote immorality. Today, he does the same.
My! Jehovah's Witnesses believe that every other religion, all of them, Catholics, Baptists, Hindus, Buddhists, Rastafarians, Jedi, Wiccans, all other religions are false because they, the Jehovah's Witnesses, are the only true religion. So keep that in mind. They are saying here that the devil is using religions to appeal to people's immoral desires. Huh? Now, I can think of a lot of things that appeal to different kinds of desires, but religion? Not usually one of them.
False religion tolerates and even promotes immoral conduct. Consequently, many who claim to serve God have abandoned his clear standards of morality.
How? Look, I have known plenty of religionists in my time. Plenty of people of lots of different faiths, and not one of them, outside of maybe the Wiccans, promoted what Jehovah's Witnesses consider immoral conduct as part of their religion. Not one. Hell, the Muslims will effing kill you for it. Last time I checked, that was not very tolerant. I think maybe they consider the fact that most religions don't practice shunning to be tolerance. But if that's what they're thinking, then they are really way off the mark. Just because a church decides not to destroy a person's entire life because they have sex once doesn't mean that they're tolerating immorality. Our next article is from a book entitled Draw Close to Jehovah. How the hell do you do that? I mean, does it involve spacecraft or psychedelic mushrooms or I don't know.
The law of Jehovah is perfect. Whereas Canaanite temples featured rooms set aside for sexual activity, the Mosaic law stated that those in an unclean state could not even enter the temple. Thus, since sexual relations brought on a period of uncleanness, no one could lawfully make sex a part of worship at Jehovah's house.
There's just really so much here. Like, even in this short paragraph, oh my God, where do I even start? First, let me start with temples with special sex rooms. Wow. Wonder how often those are cleaned. Second, why the Jehovah's Witnesses feel the need to mention this. And then uncleanness. The Jehovah's Witnesses used to talk about this a whole lot when I was in the Kingdom Hall. What was considered clean and unclean under the Mosaic law, even though we're no longer supposedly bound by the Mosaic law. So here's just a short list of things that were considered unclean. Pigs, shellfish, touching anything dead. So I guess anyone who cooked would be perpetually unclean. Menstruation. Now that was a huge deal. Something so central to fertility and continuation of the species. Unclean. Not only were women considered unclean, but any piece of furniture that they used was also unclean. So, as they point out here, having sex also made both partners unclean, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, how are people supposed to become fruitful and fill the earth and all that shit if they're unclean and can't worship if they have sex? And if they don't worship, Jehovah gets all mad and starts killing them all. Gee, I wonder why anyone would have feelings of shame about sex. Religion is so weird. So, what they're saying here is that Jehovah worshippers couldn't have sex rooms at their houses of worship because sex made them unclean and no one who was unclean was allowed to worship. Okay then, I'm actually fine with that, because could you imagine if sex were a part of regular Jehovah's Witness worship? I think about the congregations that I used to go to and just... Seriously, we did not need that mental image. Our next article is from the Watchtower in 2019 as well, and it's called...
Do not be fooled by the wisdom of this world. In the United States, the early part of the 20th century saw a big change in people's viewpoint about morality. Previously, many believed that sex was reserved only for those who are married and was not a topic to be discussed in public. But those standards crumbled and permissive views spread.
Well, okay. Maybe in the United States this could be a little bit true, but I don't buy that everyone was a straight-laced Puritan before 1960. In fact, research supports the idea that humans have been getting freaky since the dawn of time. People were regularly reading erotica 300 years ago. There were trans people among the Native American tribes, and the Greeks and Romans clearly engaged in homosexual sex. The dildo has been around for 30,000 years, according to archaeologists, and we all know that prostitution has always been a thing. The view Watchtower is espousing here is actually very myopic, and it's rooted in Victorian and Puritan ideas. Not to mention, it's very white-centered because it doesn't even take into account other cultures, some of which have very different attitudes towards sex. No, they just kind of want to continue pushing that narrative that the world is coming to shit and it all has to be destroyed at Armageddon. Because, sure it does. Why not?
In the 1960s, issues such as living together without being married, homosexual conduct, and easy divorce became prominent.
My.
Many forms of entertainment featured increasingly explicit depictions of sex. In recent decades, the bad effects of loose moral standards have been felt in many ways. One author wrote that the cause of broken families, single-parent families, emotional wounds, pornography addiction, and similar woes is related to the deregulation of sexual norms now shaping society. The prevalence of sexually transmitted diseases, such as AIDS, is just one indication that the wisdom of the world is foolishness.
The fact that they're calling sexuality that doesn't conform to their narrow worldview the wisdom of the world is kind of problematic in and of itself. They're creating this convenient straw man that they can easily shoot down. The truth is that in America before the 1960s, emotional wounds actually did exist. Pornography already existed. People still got divorced and there were still single-parent families. I mean, what do they think happened if a parent died, for Christ's sakes? People were still unhappy in their marriages sometimes. But instead of being able to depart a bad situation relatively easily, relatively, it's not easy to get divorced. It really isn't. If you don't believe me, try it sometime. They had to stay and endure, particularly if they were women. People still lived together without getting married sometimes. It wasn't socially accepted, but it still happened. Homosexuals actually existed, as they have since the dawn of time. They just had to hide because they were afraid that some fine, upright, closeted Christian asshole would kill them for existing. People were less happy, less themselves, more coerced into compliance with a social contract they never agreed to. I don't see how changing that would be a bad thing myself, but then I'm generally not an asshole.
The world's view of sex serves Satan's purpose. No doubt he delights to see people abuse God's gift of sex and degrade God's gift of marriage. Not only does sexual immorality tarnish Jehovah's beautiful gift of procreation, but it can prevent those who engage in it from inheriting everlasting life.
Does anyone else think this is just stupid? I mean, why would Satan be happy about people having sex and getting divorced? I mean, why would he care, presuming he existed, which he doesn't? Why is it so important what people do with their own bodies? Let's look at a study question, shall we?
What dignified and healthy view of sexuality is presented in the Bible?
Well, sex slavery is apparently okay, according to the Bible. And there's lots of stuff about how to punish people who commit adultery, fornicate, or otherwise use their genitals in an unapproved manner, ranging from stoning them to death to stabbing them with swords. Basically, according to the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Bible says you should only have sex if you're married, with your spouse, and you're not enjoying it too much.
People who adopt the wisdom of this world ridicule the Bible's moral standards, claiming that they are unrealistic. Such people might ask, why would God create us with sexual desires and then tell us not to act on them?
That is actually a perfectly reasonable, perfectly logical question. Does the Watchtower have an answer to it? No.
That question is founded on the flawed belief that humans must act on every urge they feel.
No, it isn't. No one is advocating acting on every single urge you feel. If I did that, it would be a really bad scene because I regularly feel the urge to slap people. But I don't do it. Why? Because I'm not an asshole, contrary to popular belief. Sexual desires are not just a random urge, people. They're very basic biology, and this argument is just stupid.
But the Bible states otherwise. It dignifies us by teaching that we can choose to control improper impulses.
But they've ignored the original question, which is, why did God supposedly create humanity with sexual desire, which is more than just a passing whim, by the way, if said desire is improper? They have no answer for this. Why? Because there isn't one.
In addition, Jehovah has provided the gift of marriage, an arrangement in which proper sexual desires can be honorably satisfied. Within that arrangement, a husband and wife can enjoy sex without the regrets and insecurities that so often result from immorality.
Except that they can't. See the past articles in the Watchtower and other literature about the proper way to enjoy sex in marriage. And still, they haven't addressed the freaking question. If God thought it was only proper to want sex with your spouse when you are married, then why did he give anyone sexual desire outside of that? And before you start telling me some crazy story about being tested by God, let me remind you that testing people in that way is particularly immature and frankly pretty mean. Especially if you're the almighty, omniscient creator of the universe. God would supposedly know that no human could actually be successful at this ridiculousness, so requiring them to overcome their basic biology at every turn when you know that is just God being kind of a dick. But as far as I can tell, God doesn't actually exist, so this is actually just a bunch of repressed, probably closeted old men being dicks. Surprise, surprise. Our next article is from the Watchtower in 2020. We've made it to this year. It's called
Keep walking in the truth. Young Christians in particular may feel pressured to adopt their classmates' or workmates' views of immoral conduct. That is what happened to Alexander. He recalls, some girls at school tried to pressure me into having sex with them. They said that since I did not have a girlfriend, I must be a homosexual.
My. Oh, Alexander, you poor thing. I mean, first of all, your parents couldn't spell, and then you get accused of being gay because you turned down group sex with your schoolmates. I mean, y'all. There is no way that this is a real experience. No freaking way. You know how I know? Because there is not a Jehovah's Witness boy on earth who would turn this down. I mean, they might not be able to actually do it for various reasons, depending on how tight their parents' lockdown was for one thing. But seriously, I also question whether these worldly sluts at school, because, you know, all worldly females are sluts, don't you know? If these little heathens actually approached him and said,
"Hey Alexander, why don't you come have sex with all of us?"
And then, because he supposedly said no, they started calling him gay. Well, I mean, it might have been a legitimate question. I mean, if you aren't into girls, maybe you're into boys. Or maybe they were being mean. It's certainly possible, but I think it's more likely that none of this ever happened, and Alexander is made up by Watchtower writers, complete with horrifically misspelled name.
If you face similar tests, remember that when you stick to your Bible-based convictions, you protect your self-respect, your health, your emotional well-being, and your relationship with Jehovah.
Oh, Jehovah's blessing. Let me get this straight. So you can respect yourself only because you're denying the way your body works. And while it's true that abstinence will protect you from STDs, you might not have the best emotional well-being. Blue balls suck, or so I'm told. As for your relationship with Jehovah, what they mean here is you won't publicly be shamed and shunned if you just say no, theoretically. Unless somebody really hates you and makes up stories about you and the elders choose to believe them rather than you because you won't confess, which to them indicates unrepentance, because that happens a lot.
And each time you resist temptation, it will get easier for you to do what is right.
Oh, guys, no, it won't. Pent-up pressure will eventually explode if not given an outlet. It may take time, but eventually it's gonna happen. Now, whether it's giving in and masturbating to release the tension and then feeling horribly ashamed about it, or finally giving in to nature and having sex with someone, or marrying the first available Jehovah's Witness you come across so that you could do it already, is gonna happen. These poor kids.
Remember, too, that this world's twisted view of sex originates with Satan. So when you refuse to compromise, you conquer the wicked one.
I mean, how do they not just start laughing out loud at this bullshit? Conquer your penis and you conquer Satan himself? Really? I just can't. I know. Let's talk about irrelevant Bible characters some more. This little gem comes from something called Our Christian Life and Ministry, or CLAM for short. Really? Which replaced the Kingdom Ministry, previously known as the Kingdom Service, previously known as the Informant. Now that was a little pamphlet on this really crappy newsprint, intended only for Jehovah's Witnesses, active publishers, and not shared with anyone else. It used to contain insider information on increasing sales numbers, etc. Now it's kind of like a kindergarten worksheet. This one is from May of 2020, and this part is called
Be Like Joseph. Flee from immorality. Joseph provides a good example for us if we are tempted to commit sexual immorality.
So is that like committing perjury or committing suicide? I mean, they make it sound so criminal and so awful when all they mean is having sex.
Each time the wife of his master tried to seduce him, he refused. His reply, "How could I commit this great badness and actually sin against God?" indicated that he had already given thought to Jehovah's view of marital faithfulness. Then, when the situation became critical, he fled instead of lingering and giving the woman a chance to weaken his resolve.
Oh, is this sounding familiar? It should, because it's basically a restating of the same thing they said in a Watchtower article from 2017, which we looked at a few minutes ago. You may have noticed that they frequently recycle content, occasionally tweaking it a bit to fit whatever crazy bullshit point they're trying to make at the moment. In this case, they're saying that Jehovah's Witnesses should flee from anyone that they might be attracted to for fear of having their resolve weakened, aka actually participating in biology. There was so much more context to this fictional situation with Joseph and Potty's wife, who didn't have a name, as usual, just Potty's wife. And notice that she is depicted as a predator here, not a bored, thirsty housewife looking for any break from the monotony. No, she is a brazen slut trying to seduce this innocent man. Now, Joseph was a slave. He was not just a regular guy who happened to be walking by. There was actually a significant power differential here. Not to mention that, as we said before, he could be killed or sold or punished in a number of other horrible ways, no matter what he did. If he fled, it was more likely because he wanted to live than because he was worried about his dick taking over and causing him to commit immorality. Let's be honest. A normally functioning adult should be able to see through the haze of horniness, to consider the big picture and weigh the risks and benefits of any given situation. Yes, it would have been wrong to screw Potty's wife, and I'm not disputing that, but there was a lot more to it than just Jehovah's Witness morality, which is actually really skewed and unhealthy. And the possibility remains that maybe he just wasn't into her. Well, that's it for this episode. Tune in next time when we venture into the past, pre-1970. I know I promised that last time, but then I found these newer articles and I just had to share them. Sorry about it. If you want old stuff, be sure and tune in for episode 20, which is sure to be fun and educational and gross and gratuitous and kind of unnecessary. Just what you've come to expect from Jehovah's Witness sexual advice. Until then, I'm Sister Fister. This is crazy.